Greetings Internet, I'm Tommy the Keyblade Master and this is my channel. This month is October and you know what that means, Halloween. We're talking about ghosts, ghouls, and what better series in video games that captures all that than the classic Castlevania series. I'm going to be taking a look at the top 5 games for me of that series. We will start with Castlevania Lament of Innocence. Blah. Great, just what I need, an old fart gaming vampire. You young whippersnapper didn't get the memo that all these 3D Castlevania games suck. Alright, just because the Castlevania N64 games had a few problems does not mean all Castlevania 3D games suck. Now I will admit that the fact that I couldn't record DS footage puts Lament of Innocence in the number 5 slot instead of Portrait of Ruin. However, Lament of Innocence is still a really great game. It sucks, I say, and I'm going to be telling everybody about it throughout the review. Oh no, you won't. I got the perfect thing to repel old fart gaming vampires. It's the latest mobile device. I can check my email. I can even play games on it without any buttons. Hey, look, I can even download movies and stream them about sparkling vampires. No, not that! And to be fair, I've never read or watched Twilight, but then I've never really wanted to. But now that pain in the neck is out of my way, let's look at Castlevania Lament of Innocence. Castlevania Lament of Innocence has a very typical Iga storyline. It's the first one in his storyline, so I'm going to probably go a little bit more into plot spoilers than I normally would, since it is the origin story of the original Castlevania franchise. But anyways, it's typical Iga storyline. You'll get the beats if you played any of his other Castlevania games like Symphony of the Night. But anyways, the story begins with a long exposition about knights and about how one knight named Leon Belmont's fiancée had just been kidnapped by a vampire and has been brought into the Forest of Eternal Night. Leon goes in looking for her. And after he enters the forest, he quickly finds out that those who enter the forest can't leave as long as Walter still remains alive. But he does run into an old alchemist named Ronaldo who promises to help him, especially since Leon wandered into the forest without any weapons. Confronting a vampire without a weapon, that's a great idea if you like to wake up in the morning without a reflection. Luckily for Leon, Ronaldo has a magic whip of alchemy that he lends to Leon to battle his foes in the castle. Ronaldo also tells him what it will take to get to Walter. Walter's door is locked by 5 monsters hidden away in 5 dungeons. Typical video game stuff. Still, it's pretty entertaining. After you beat most of the dungeons, you'll go back to Ronaldo and Leon will confront him either about something he's learned from Ronaldo's past in the dungeon or something about the whip Ronaldo gave him when Leon learns that it's not up to full power yet. Towards the end of the game, it gets a little interesting. You find out how the vampire killer whip that's in the series is made, as well as the origins of the Dracula that you fight in the Castlevania series.
That's right. By becoming a vampire, I obtained eternal life. That was my goal. It was my revenge against God!
Sorry for deleting the video in that last clip, but I figured it's best to avoid as many plot spoilers as possible, but I did want to talk about that scene with him when you do finally meet Dracula. He's only in that one scene, but that is typical Iga Castlevania right there, ripping off other vampire and Dracula lore and weaving it into his own story. That is ripped right off of the Francis Ford Coppola 1990s movie, and it's also sort of based on the life of the real Vlad Dracul, who did lose his wife when she committed suicide.
Kill you and the knight!
That said, even with a lot of the clever plot twists, it does get quite cheesy sometimes, but then hey, it's an Igarashi-made Castlevania game. Cheesiness is to be expected. On to the worst part of the game, and by worst I mean the part that has aged the least well, the graphics. Yeah, for PS2 quality they're not terrible, but they haven't aged well. The main characters do look like they're plastic models, and I have to tell you, the camera control, the fixed camera that you have is just plain awkward. On the good news side though, the set design is still pretty good. Each of the 5 level layouts has a slightly different feel to them, especially the theater stage. And just some of the details on the walls and the statues that you see are pretty good for PlayStation 2 era. Like most IGA Castlevania games, the music is pretty good. Now, in IGA games, they tend to stay away from the classic Castlevania soundtrack of Bloody Tears and Vampire Killer, but still, the female music designer of this game did a very good job in adapting the music. It's really awesome. Each sound fits the stage that it's in, and it's just very haunting to listen to. Here's the theater soundtrack right here. As for the sound effects, you get some awesome sound effects of the whipping and of the monsters dying. I especially like it when you whip through things like skeleton or enemies that are made out of bone. You just hear them shatter. It's a nice soundtrack, all in all. Really good soundtrack, and it's got some strong vocals too.
Don't worry, you'll be joining them soon enough.
Are you the legendary monster that turns people to stone?
As for voice actors, you have Dave Wittenberg in the role of Leon. He plays the role of Kakashi from Naruto, if you can't tell by his voice here. Other voices include Crispin Freeman and Wendy Lee, just to name a few. It's a really good, talented bunch that does a lot of anime and other cartoons, so it's not a bad voice cast here. And I would say better in some ways than even the Lord of Shadows cast, which even brought Patrick Stewart in to do the voice acting for that game. So what is the gameplay like in Lament of Innocence? Well, it's not quite the Metroidvania games that IGA usually made, but their dungeon crawler would be a good way. Each dungeon has a puzzle that you have to solve. Usually you have to hit switches or find keys to find your way to the bad guy or a special item. Each dungeon is a little different in how it was made, but they're all fun. As for combat, it's fun and fluid. Leon has the use of his whip. He has 2 attacks, a square attack that goes nice and quickly, and then there's a triangle attack that's nice and long. Putting them in combos will do different moves. My favorite is square, square, triangle, square, which will cause you at the end to do a small crack of the whip, sending nearby enemies flying upwards and unable to defend against the final whip attack. Also, after each dungeon you will collect a orb, and that orb will change the way sub-weapons are used. For example, by equipping one of these orbs, look how it changes a Castlevania classic across into a really powerful flame type attack that targets the nearest enemy. These are useful. Of course, equipping an orb will make the sub-items lose more hearts when you use them, but they're worth fooling around with if you got the time. My only major complaint with the game's combat system is in order to use potions and health referring items, you gotta do it in combat, meaning you have to switch to using a control pad to flip through a bunch of menus to heal yourself. It's a pain in the butt when you're battling a boss like this. But the boss fights themselves are kind of fun and really challenging. Each boss has its own gimmick. Medusa there can do that ball attack. You also have to watch out because she also has a stone gauge that can turn you to stone. Meanwhile, another boss, as you can see here, will use a different variety of magic spells around the room to attack you, and then you have to attack things in the corner in order to break a barrier that he has. All the bosses are really fun and memorable. I guess I should mention there's also unlockable whips that you can find by finding keys in one dungeon and then trying to find a secret room in the other. These can be a pain in the butt and do require quite a bit of backtracking. I usually miss these because you get the best whip in the game anyways at the very end, called Vampire Killer, and you don't really need these special whips in order to get to the ending. The game's pretty easy without them. I should mention that the game is fairly short. It only takes about 5 to 6 hours to get to here, which is the stairway to the final boss, but it's sure fun while it lasts. I give Castlevania Lament of Innocence a 4 out of 5. It's got a pretty good story. It's somewhat cliche video game story, but it is entertaining. It's got a great combat system. It's a bit simple, but it is fun. And the dungeons are pretty fun to crawl through and explore. On the bad side, the graphics are kind of crappy looking nowadays. The models don't hold up as well as today's visuals. They're excellently designed, but they just don't hold up to today's visuals. And then you got that pesky camera. So that knocks it down a point from where it should be. But to say that this game is crap just because it's a 3D Castlevania doesn't do it justice. It's a great game and worth checking out. It's $10 on the PSN, and I recommend getting it. Anyways, that was number 5 of my top 5 Castlevania games. Number 4 is next week. If you want to see what it is, please click on that subscribe button that I'm putting right here. Thank you for watching. Tommy the Keyblade Master out.